I was 13 years old when my mother put my clothes in black trash bags and left me outside in the dark like something she had already decided was garbage. She said I was selfish. She said I was ruining the family. She said I'd regret choosing a scholarship over blood. What she didn't know was that night wasn't the end of my life. It was the beginning of hers unraveling. 15 years later, the same parents who erased me legally stood at my door asking for half of everything I had built. And this time, I wasn't a child on a porch in the dark. I was the one holding the documents. If you've ever been underestimated, abandoned, told you were too much for wanting more, this story is for you. Before we begin, I want you to do something simple but powerful. In the comments, write one word that describes what you would have felt at 13 in my place. Just one word. I read them. And I remember. And if stories about quiet strength, strategy, and consequences speak to you, like this video and subscribe. Not for drama. For justice. Now let me tell you how a girl they threw away became the only name on a $24 million inheritance, and why the knock on my door in 2025 was the sound of karma finally arriving. In 2010, I was 13 and obsessed with order. Not the kind you see on the outside. Our house was always tense, always loud, but the kind you find in equations. Numbers made sense. They followed rules. They rewarded effort. My name is Elena Carter, and at 13, the thing I valued most wasn't approval. It was possibility. I studied at the kitchen table long after everyone went to sleep. While my older sister, Madison, practiced monologues for expensive acting workshops my mother adored, I memorized formulas and built science fair projects from discarded parts. I wasn't trying to compete. I just wanted out. When the acceptance letter arrived, a full scholarship to an elite science program in Seattle, I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just held the envelope against my chest and felt something dangerous growing inside me. Freedom. For the first time, my future didn't depend on my mother's mood. It depended on my mind. I remember thinking, if I work hard enough, I'll never have to beg anyone to stay. I didn't know that across the hallway, my mother, Linda Carter, was already calculating something very different. And in our house, when my mother started calculating, someone always paid the price. My mother, Linda Carter, didn't yell often. She didn't have to. Control was quieter than that. It lived in small corrections, in raised eyebrows, in the way she could turn a room cold with a single sigh. Madison was her masterpiece, beautiful, dramatic, emotional in all the ways my mother understood. I was the inconvenient one. The analytical one. The daughter who asked questions instead of permission. When she read the scholarship letter, she didn't congratulate me. She placed it on the counter like it was a receipt for something she hadn't approved. Seattle, she asked, her voice smooth. And who exactly do you think you are? That was the power dynamic in our house. My achievements were threats. Madison's dreams were investments. A week later, I overheard Linda telling a friend on the phone that Madison had been accepted into an exclusive arts conservatory, expensive, prestigious, life-changing. The tuition was more than my father, Richard Carter, made in a year. That night, she came into my room and closed the door softly. Too softly. You're going to decline the scholarship, she said. Your sister needs this more. It wasn't a request. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. My future had just become a negotiation. I didn't say no right away. I asked why. That was my first mistake. Linda leaned against my doorframe like a judge already bored with the verdict. Because families sacrifice, she said. Madison has real talent. You'll be fine anywhere. Anywhere. It sounded harmless. Generous, even. But what she meant was, you are replaceable. Over the next few days, the pressure came in layers. She stopped driving me to school. She forgot to sign a permission slip for a regional science competition. At dinner, she talked about Madison's future like it was a shared family project, and referred to my scholarship as a phase. Richard kept his eyes on his plate. Silent. Neutral. Safe. Then came the subtle rewrite. When relatives called, Linda would laugh lightly and say, Elena was offered something in Seattle, but she knows her sister needs us right now. She said it like it was already decided. Like I had agreed. I hadn't. At school, I held the scholarship packet in my backpack and felt it getting heavier every day. Not because of doubt, but because of what it was costing me. One night, Linda placed a conservatory tuition brochure on my bed. We can't afford both, she whispered. So decide what kind of daughter you want to be. And for the first time, I understood, this wasn't about money. It was about obedience. The argument didn't explode. It unfolded. I'm not declining it, I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. I earned this. Linda stared at me like I had just confessed to a crime. Madison stood behind her in the hallway, silent, wide-eyed, but she didn't step in. She never did. You're choosing strangers over your own sister, my mother said loudly enough for the neighbors to hear through the open window. After everything we've done for you. Everything. The word echoed like a performance. Within an hour, my clothes were in black trash bags. Not folded. Stuffed. My science trophies thrown in last. I watched it happen like I was outside my own body. Richard tried once, Linda, maybe we should calm down, but one look from her and he retreated. By sunset, I was sitting on the porch with 2 garbage bags and a backpack. The porch light was off. The air was cold. I could see the glow of the living room through the curtains, shadows moving, life continuing. She left me there for hours. No apology. No hesitation. Just a message. At 10:43 p.m., she made a call. Not to comfort me. To remove me. And when headlights finally pulled into the driveway, I realized something terrifying. She hadn't lost control. She had executed a decision. The car that pulled into the driveway belonged to my father's older brother, Daniel Carter. Uncle Daniel stepped out slowly, taking in the scene, the trash bags, the dark porch, me sitting upright like I was trying not to look abandoned. His jaw tightened, but he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Linda opened the door before he knocked. She's your problem now, she said flatly. She refuses to cooperate. I remember Daniel looking at me, not at her. Is that true, Elena? I won't give up my scholarship, I said. That was it. That was my crime. Inside, papers were already on the dining table. Linda had prepared them. I didn't understand the language then, voluntary relinquishment, transfer of guardianship, parental waiver. It sounded clinical. Responsible. It wasn't emotional exile. It was legal abandonment. Richard signed without reading. Madison stood at the stairs, watching through the railing. No tears. No protest. Daniel read every line. Twice. You're sure about this? He asked Linda one last time. She didn't hesitate. Completely. The pen scratched against paper. One signature. Then another. And just like that, I wasn't their daughter anymore, on paper or in practice. As we drove away, I looked back at the house shrinking in the rearview mirror. I expected to feel broken. Instead, I felt something colder. Finality. But I had no idea what those signatures would mean 15 years later. Seattle smelled like rain and possibility. Uncle Daniel didn't ask me to talk about that night. He gave me a bedroom, a desk, and something I hadn't felt in years, quiet. Real quiet. The kind that doesn't vibrate with tension. The first week, I barely spoke. I unpacked my trash bags carefully, smoothing out wrinkled clothes like I was restoring evidence. At night, I replayed my mother's voice in my head. Selfish. Ungrateful. Replaceable. Grief doesn't always look like tears. Sometimes it looks like productivity. I threw myself into the science program. I studied until my thoughts were numbers instead of memories. Teachers praised me. Mentors noticed me. Uncle Daniel attended every presentation like it was a championship game. Still, when the house lights went off, the silence turned heavy. I wasn't just grieving my parents. I was grieving the illusion that they had ever been mine. At 14, I started therapy. Not because I was falling apart, but because I refused to let what happened define me. My therapist once asked, "Are you angry?" "I'm observing," I replied. That was the truth. I wasn't plotting revenge. I was building distance. And somewhere between algebra proofs and rainy bus rides, I made a decision no one else could see. I would never again let someone hold power over my future. 2 years after that night on the porch, Uncle Daniel called me into his office. There were no trash bags this time. No raised voices. Just sunlight through wide windows and a folder on his desk. "I want this to be official," he said quietly. Inside the folder were adoption papers. He didn't frame it as rescue. He framed it as choice. "You don't owe me anything, Elena. But if you want my name, it's yours." For the first time since I was 13, I felt something fragile rise in my chest. Not dependence. Not desperation. Belonging. At 15, I became legally his daughter. The paperwork was clean. Final. Documented. The same way my mother had erased me, Daniel restored me, carefully, lawfully, permanently. That day, I understood the power of signatures. They end things. They also protect them. I kept copies of every document. Not out of paranoia, but out of principle. My life had already been altered once by ink on paper. I would never again underestimate what it could do. From then on, I studied more than science. I studied contracts, structures, financial systems. I watched how businesses rose and collapsed based on clauses no one bothered to read. While my biological parents faded into distant, occasional emails asking for help, I was becoming something they would never anticipate. Not emotional. Not reactive. Prepared. And preparation, I was learning, is the quietest form of power. For 15 years, my biological parents only contacted me when they needed something. A car repair. A temporary loan. Help with Madison's rent in Los Angeles. The messages were always carefully worded, never apologetic, never accountable. Just casual enough to pretend nothing irreversible had happened. "Family helps family," Linda would write. I never argued. I never confronted. I responded like a CPA. Short. Documented. Traceable. Sometimes I sent small amounts. Sometimes I declined. Every transfer was labeled. Every email archived. Not out of bitterness, out of pattern recognition. Meanwhile, I graduated top of my class. Became a CPA. Joined Daniel's company full-time. Learned cash flow structures, tax strategy, acquisition models. By 28, I was CFO, overseeing a company approaching $24 million in assets. On the surface, my parents looked stable. Madison posted filtered photos online. Linda shared inspirational quotes about motherhood. Richard liked every post. To anyone watching from the outside, it might have seemed like they had one. They kept their house. Their narrative. Their pride. They told relatives I was doing well thanks to the family values we instilled. I let them talk. Because real power doesn't interrupt lies. It waits for documentation. And in 2025, documentation was about to matter more than anyone realized. By the time my uncle passed in 2025, I had spent years observing my parents like an algorithm running in the background. Every call. Every email. Every subtle attempt to guilt me into giving more. They were predictable. Linda's tone shifted when she wanted sympathy. Richard's silence always followed her cue. Madison only engaged when she thought it would benefit her socially. Their actions weren't random, they were calculated. But predictable calculations are easy to read if you're patient. I had learned patience in that dark Seattle apartment, unpacking my childhood from trash bags. I had learned strategy in boardrooms, in audit reports, in contracts that made or broke businesses. And now, with Daniel gone, the test was real. The first email arrived within hours of the funeral. "We need to discuss the will," Linda wrote. Richard added, "Elena, we believe you exerted undue influence." Undue influence. The audacity was breathtaking. I didn't respond. I watched. I catalogued. Every letter. Every demand. Every lawyer they contacted. Because revenge isn't loud. Revenge isn't quick. Revenge is noticing patterns no one else does, and letting them run straight into consequences they never saw coming. And in my office, surrounded by spreadsheets and contracts, I allowed myself a private thought. Let them talk. Let them move. Every word they write brings them closer to the truth they're too blind to see. The first real move wasn't dramatic. It wasn't confrontation. It was paperwork. I asked my legal team to review every document my parents might try to use against me. Wills, adoption papers, bank statements, tax returns, correspondence, every line. Every signature. Every date. Then I organized it. Chronologically. Impeccably. Ready for scrutiny. Ready for exposure. I knew they would try to claim undue influence on Daniel. I knew they'd hope no one would remember the renunciation they had signed when I was 13. I had copies. Certified. Witnessed. Legally ironclad. Next, I quietly instructed the company's CFOs and financial managers to prepare reports showing every penny my uncle had earned, invested, and donated. Transparency. Impeccable clarity. No room for argument. Meanwhile, I listened. I let Linda call 3 times a week, each attempt dripping with subtle manipulation. She had no idea I was cataloging her tone, her excuses, her scripts. I spoke to no one outside my inner circle. Not a friend, not a colleague. Silence became my ally. At night, in my office, I allowed myself a small smile. They thought the heirloom was theirs to claim. They didn't know the heirloom was already accounted for, locked behind strategy, patience, and proof. And soon, they would realize that they had stepped into a trap they couldn't see. The question wasn't if they would fall. It was when. Weeks later, the first complication arrived, a letter from a high-profile lawyer claiming representation for Linda and Richard. I read it once. Then again. Every word was calculated to intimidate. They were alleging undue influence, emotional manipulation, even questioning my role in the company. They demanded half of everything. My first instinct wasn't fear, it was calculation. I asked my legal team to analyze the claims line by line. Every accusation was baseless. Every threat was vulnerable. Every fact they assumed was contradicted by signatures, dates, and documented correspondence spanning 15 years. Even so, the lawyer's tone was aggressive enough to unsettle a lesser mind. But I didn't reply. I didn't panic. I simply observed. Meanwhile, Linda called me. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice, once commanding, now trembled with controlled urgency. She hinted at family fairness and doing the right thing. I recognized it instantly, the first crack. She wanted me to react emotionally, to make a mistake, to expose any weakness. But I had learned silence. I had learned patience. I had learned that the most devastating moves are invisible until the reveal. As I sat in my office, looking at spreadsheets and letters, I realized something quietly satisfying. The higher they climbed in their bluff, the further they walked into my plan. And the next step, when I chose it, would leave no escape. Even with every document secured and every pattern observed, I knew there would be a cost. I had planned meticulously, but the final move required personal restraint. I could have confronted them immediately, shown them their signatures, their debts, their legal renunciation, but doing so too early risked alerting them, giving them time to manipulate public opinion. So I sacrificed visibility. I let the media leak stories about family disputes over inheritance, carefully keeping my name out. I avoided calls from relatives who asked what I intended. I ignored the impulse to respond emotionally. Every instinct to assert myself was buried. At home, I declined luxuries. I avoided public appearances. Every small pleasure was postponed to maintain leverage. I sacrificed comfort and visibility to ensure ultimate control. Even my friends noticed. "Why are you letting them talk like this?" one asked. I smiled faintly. Because the moment I act, the game is over. And I intend to win entirely, not partially. I read through letters from my parents again, pleas thinly veiled as concern, and folded them neatly. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of true strategy. Patience. Observation. Silence. Sacrifice. And I understood something essential: victory isn't about rage or revenge. It's about knowing what to give up to secure the outcome you can never leave to chance. The trap was set. And now, all that remained was waiting for them to step inside. The day of the will reading arrived, bright and clinical, in a stately law office that smelled of polished wood and ink. My parents arrived early, their polished facades concealing anxiety I already knew to exist. Linda smiled thinly, Richard nodded stiffly, and Madison clutched her purse like it could protect her from what was coming. None of them suspected how meticulously every detail had been prepared. As the attorney opened the envelope, the room went silent. First came the debts. Richard had never repaid an $80,000 loan from my uncle. Every line item was documented, notarized, undeniable. Next came the renunciation papers, signed when I was 13. Legal, binding, and irrefutable. Then the adoption papers. 15 years of legal protection, now revealed in stark black and white proof. Finally, the will itself. My name, Elena Carter, sole heir to $24 million in assets, with letters from my uncle declaring his love and trust, and directives explicitly excluding Linda and Richard from any inheritance. The room froze. Madison's face turned pale. Linda's hand trembled as she clutched the table. Richard blinked, dumbstruck, like a man who had never understood numbers or consequences. And the final twist, the donations to charity, the public letters, the attorney's revelation that their own lawyer was in conflict and would be suspended, sealed their humiliation. For 15 years, they thought they could manipulate reality. They had walked straight into it. The attorney's words echoed in the room, crisp and precise: all assets, all decisions, are legally documented. Elena Carter is the sole heir. No claims by Linda or Richard Carter will be recognized. Linda's face went slack, her carefully maintained composure crumbling in real time. Richard leaned back, as if the chair could somehow absorb the shock. Madison's lips parted, a quiet gasp betraying her disbelief. Every accusation they had made, undue influence, manipulation, emotional coercion, was now exposed as hollow. Their narrative, crafted over 15 years, collapsed under the weight of proof. As the room processed the revelation, I sat quietly, poised, watching their faces shift from confidence to desperation. I didn't gloat. I didn't raise my voice. I let the evidence speak. Let the silence speak. Even the attorney representing them faltered, and within minutes, it was revealed he had a conflict of interest. Professional repercussions were immediate: suspension, public censure. The humiliation was total. And yet, for me, it wasn't about spectacle. It was about consequences. Clear. Inevitable. Fair. Linda tried to speak, her voice shaking, attempting to reclaim some dignity, some narrative. I shook my head slowly. Some doors, once closed, remain closed. And this time, the truth wasn't negotiable. Weeks after the reading, the dust had settled, but the lessons lingered. Linda sent an email. Short. Polite. I realize I was wrong. I hope we can reconcile. I read it once. Then I deleted it. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. I forgave, silently, but I would never allow her presence to dictate my life again. Madison, however, wrote differently. She admitted what I had long known: she had seen everything from the window that night, had done nothing, and felt cowardice where courage was required. No request for money. No claim to forgiveness. Just honesty. I accepted her letters under clear terms: no discussions of inheritance, no manipulation, calls limited, conversations brief. We began cautiously, with boundaries. Reconciliation, not naivety. The company thrived under my leadership. I established a scholarship for children abandoned or suppressed by their families, an investment not just in education, but in justice and opportunity. I honored my uncle's legacy, proving that the right support, strategy, and guidance can change the course of a life. I never needed to shout, to strike, or to humiliate. The law, documentation, and patience had done that for me. The true victory was quiet, strategic, and irrevocable. I reclaimed my life, my power, and my dignity. And for those who tried to erase me 15 years ago, they learned a final lesson no one can teach twice: abandonment has consequences. Boundaries are permanent. Justice, when earned patiently, leaves no loopholes. I am Elena Carter. I am the author of my own legacy. And the door behind me is closed forever. If this story of quiet strength and strategic justice resonated with you, hit the like button to show your support. I want to hear from you. Share in the comments one moment when patience and planning helped you overcome a challenge. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that proves resilience and intelligence always prevail.